There is a door that some people never open. Not because it is locked. Not because they lost the key. But because opening it could change everything they believe. The strange part is, the longer it stays closed, the heavier it becomes. Until one day, the door is no longer hiding a room. It is hiding the truth. This is the story of a young man who spent years walking past one ordinary door. Without knowing, his entire future was waiting behind it. His name was Ian. 3 months ago, his father passed away. The small repair shop became his. So did the worn tools, the unfinished repairs, the long, quiet evenings, and one small brown door at the back of the shop. It had always been there. As long as Ian could remember. Customers walked past it every day. Children noticed it, then forgot about it. Neighbors treated it as if it didn't exist. Even inside his own family, nobody ever spoke about it. When Ian was 8 years old, he once pointed at the door and asked, "Baba, what's inside?" His father smiled without looking up from his work. Then answered with only 4 words. "That door stays closed." Nothing else. No story. No explanation. As the years passed, Ian stopped asking. Life moved on. School became work. Work became responsibility. And the old brown door quietly became part of the background. Until everything changed. Now the shop belonged to him. Every morning, he unlocked the front shutter, repaired broken radios, fixed old fans, changed cracked phone screens, helped neighbors who couldn't afford new appliances. By sunset, the last customer always left. The street slowly became quiet. Before locking the shop, Ian always looked toward the same corner. The brown door. It never moved. It never made a sound. Yet somehow, it felt as though it had been waiting for him. One evening, his mother arrived carrying 2 cups of tea. She placed one beside him. Then noticed where he was looking. For just a moment, the warmth disappeared from her face. She lowered her voice. "Your father asked us to never open that door." Ian looked at her. "Why?" She remained silent. A few seconds later, she picked up her bag, changed the subject, and quietly left the shop. That answer should have ended the conversation. Instead, it became the beginning of 1,000 questions. The following afternoon, the old shopkeeper next door stopped by. His name was Rashid. He had worked beside Ian's father for more than 20 years. As they closed the shutters together, Rashid noticed Ian staring at the same corner. He sighed. Then rested both hands on his walking stick. "Some promises," he said softly, "become even heavier after a man is gone." Ian frowned. "What promise?" Rashid looked toward the door. His lips moved as though he wanted to speak. But no words came. Finally, he shook his head. "Your father had his reasons." Then he slowly walked away. Ian stood alone in the silent shop. His eyes returned to the brown door. For the first time, it no longer felt like an old piece of wood. It felt like the only place where his father's voice still remained. The days that followed, something began to change. Not inside the shop. Inside Ian. The question refused to leave him. Why would a man who spent his entire life repairing broken things leave behind one thing that nobody was allowed to touch? The thought followed him everywhere. While fixing old radios, while serving customers, even while walking home at night. The door stayed closed. Yet somehow, it occupied more space in his mind than the rest of the shop combined. A few days later, an elderly woman named Farida came to collect her sewing machine. She had known Ayan's father for years. After paying for the repair, she looked around the shop. Her eyes stopped at the brown door. For a brief second, her smile disappeared. Then she quietly said, "Your father was a better man than most people ever realized." Ayan looked up. "What do you mean?" Farida smiled gently. "The answer isn't mine to give." She picked up her machine and slowly walked away. Once again. Another person. Another secret. Another unanswered question. That evening, Ayan closed the shop later than usual. The street outside had already fallen silent. He stood alone near the counter, looking toward the back corner. The door hadn't changed. But he had. For years, it had been nothing more than part of the wall. Now, it felt like someone was silently asking him to come closer. He walked toward it. Slowly. The old wood carried marks of time. Tiny scratches. Faded paint. Rust gathering around the hinges. Near the center, he noticed something he had never seen before. A few letters. Scratched into the wood. Time had almost erased them. He leaned closer. Tried to read them. But they were too worn to understand. Someone had written something there. Long ago. Whatever it was. It had almost disappeared. Just like the reason the door had been closed. That night, sleep never came. Ayan lay awake, listening to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same brown door. His mother's warning. Rashid's silence. Farida's unfinished sentence. Each memory pointed toward the same place. Yet none of them explained anything. Just before midnight, he sat up. The room was completely still. Without thinking, he got dressed, picked up the shop keys, and walked back through the empty streets. A few minutes later, he stood inside the repair shop. Only moonlight entered through the front window. The familiar room looked different at night. The shelves stood like silent witnesses. The old tools rested exactly where his father had left them. Everything felt frozen in time. Except Ayan. He slowly walked toward the back corner. Stopped in front of the brown door. For a long moment, he simply stared at it. His father's words echoed inside his mind. That door stays closed. His mother's warning followed. Your father asked us to never open it. Then Rashid's quiet voice. Some promises become heavier after a man is gone. Ayan closed his eyes. Took a slow breath. Then whispered into the silence. I'm sorry, Baba. But I need to know. His trembling hand reached toward the old handle. And for the first time in years, his fingers wrapped around it. For a moment, nothing happened. Ayan pushed gently. The door refused to move. Years of dust had sealed it shut. He pressed harder. A long, tired creak echoed through the empty shop. The sound filled every corner of the room. As though the shop itself had been waiting to hear it again. The door slowly opened. A cool breath of stale air drifted out. Dust floated through the moonlight. Ayan stood still. His heartbeat was louder than the silence around him. Then, he stepped inside. The room was much smaller than he had imagined. Barely large enough for a chair. A narrow shelf. And a wooden table resting against the wall. Nothing looked valuable. No hidden treasure. No family fortune. Just years of quiet stillness. In one corner, a small wooden box rested on the floor. Its lid wasn't locked. Only closed. As though someone expected to return one day. Beside it, bundles of old letters sat neatly tied with faded string. Above the table, a single framed photograph leaned against the wall. Ian picked it up. His father looked much younger. Standing beside a woman he had never seen before. Both of them were smiling. Not at the camera, but at someone standing just outside the picture. Ian turned the frame over. Nothing. No name. No date. Only silence. Another question. Who was she? And why had his father hidden the photograph here? He carefully placed it back. Then looked at the wooden box. His hands hesitated. Something inside him whispered. If you open this, nothing will ever feel the same again. Slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of envelopes. Every single one carried the same name. Ian. His breath caught. His father had written every letter himself. The handwriting was unmistakable. Some envelopes looked almost new. Others had faded with age. One date caught his attention. 12 years earlier. Another. 8 years earlier. Then 5. Then 2. His father hadn't written one letter. He had been writing to him. For years. Without saying a word. Ian untied the oldest bundle. His fingers trembled as he opened the first envelope. The paper had turned soft with age. The first line read, "If one day you find these letters, it means I am no longer here to explain them." Ian stopped reading. His throat tightened. He looked around the tiny room. For the first time, he understood. His father hadn't been hiding from him. He had been preparing for this moment. Long before either of them knew it would come. He lowered his eyes. And continued reading. "Today you asked me why we don't visit the family land anymore." Ian froze. He remembered that question. He had been a child. His father had smiled. Then changed the subject. The letter continued. "I sold my share of the land. So you could stay in school." Ian's hands began to shake. His memories returned all at once. That had been the same year. His school fees suddenly stopped being a problem. The same year. His father started working later into the night. The same year. They never visited the village again. All those years. Ian believed life had simply changed. He never imagined. His father had quietly traded his own inheritance for his son's future. A single tear fell onto the paper. But there were still dozens of unopened letters waiting beside him. For several minutes. Ian couldn't move. The letter rested in his hands. Yet it felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. He wiped his eyes. Reached for the next envelope. And slowly unfolded it. "If you're reading this, I'm guessing you're old enough to understand why I never complained." Ian read every word carefully. His father wrote about the years when the repair shop almost closed. There were weeks when only 1 or 2 customers walked through the door. Some nights, he repaired broken radios until after midnight. Just to earn enough for the next day's expenses. But that wasn't what shocked Ian. The next paragraph did. "There were days I walked home instead of taking the bus. Not because I enjoyed the walk. But because your lunch mattered more than my comfort." Ian closed his eyes. Suddenly, small memories returned. His father always arrived home tired. His shoes were covered in dust. His clothes smelled of solder and machine oil. As a child, Ian thought that was simply part of being an adult. Now, he understood the truth. His father hadn't been tired because life was difficult. He had been tired because he quietly carried burdens his son never had to feel. Ian reached for another letter. This one was shorter. Only a single page. Today you came home with a drawing from school. You apologized because you thought it wasn't good enough. A faint smile appeared on Ian's face. He remembered that day. He had almost thrown the drawing away. The letter continued. I kept it. Not because it was perfect. Because you made it. Ian looked around the small room. For the first time, he noticed a thin folder resting beneath the wooden box. He opened it. Inside, carefully protected between old sheets of paper, was the drawing. The same crooked house. The same uneven trees. The same smiling stick figures. His father had kept it. For more than 20 years. Ian laughed softly through his tears. He had forgotten the drawing. His father never had. He picked up another envelope. The handwriting looked weaker. Less steady. This letter had been written much later. The doctor says my hands may not stay this steady for much longer. Ian's chest tightened. He continued reading. If one day you notice that I work more slowly, please don't mistake it for weakness. I'm simply trying to finish everything I promised before I run out of time. The words hit him harder than anything before. He remembered becoming impatient. He remembered finishing sentences for his father. He remembered secretly wondering why everything suddenly took him so long. Now he knew. His father had been fighting time itself. Without ever asking anyone to notice. The room felt different now. It was no longer filled with silence. It was filled with a voice. A voice that had waited patiently. Inside folded pieces of paper. For the first time since the funeral, Ian no longer felt like he had lost his father. He felt as though he had finally met him. Then, at the very bottom of the wooden box, his fingers touched one final envelope. Unlike the others, it was still sealed. The paper looked newer. The handwriting trembled more than any letter he had read. Across the front, his father had written only 4 words. Open this one last. Ian stared at it. His heart began to race. Somehow, he knew this wasn't just another letter. It was the one his father had wanted him to read. When everything else finally made sense. For a long time, Ian simply stared at the final envelope. His father's handwriting looked different. Slower. Shakier. As though every letter had taken more effort than the last. He turned the envelope over. The back was sealed. Untouched. Waiting only for him. His hands trembled as he broke the seal. He unfolded the paper carefully. The first sentence stopped him completely. If you're reading this, you finally opened the door. Ian closed his eyes. It felt as though his father was sitting beside him once again. The letter continued. I knew you wouldn't open it while I was alive. Not because I didn't trust you. Because I wanted you to remember me as your father. Not as the man who quietly counted every sacrifice. Ian lowered the letter. His chest felt heavy. All those years, he believed silence meant distance. Now he understood. Sometimes, silence is another language of love. He continued reading. Children should never feel responsible for the weight their parents choose to carry. That was my job. Not yours. Ian felt tears running down his face. Every question he had carried for years was disappearing. Not because he had found explanations. Because he had finally understood his father. Near the middle of the page, another paragraph caught his attention. If I have one regret, it isn't the money I spent. It isn't the land I sold. It isn't the long nights. My only regret is that I never told you these things while I was still here. The room fell silent. Ian looked around. The chair. The shelf. The letters. The photograph. Everything suddenly felt less like a hidden room, and more like a lifetime that had been quietly waiting to be understood. The final lines were short. Almost unfinished. One day, you may become a father too. If that day comes, don't try to become a perfect parent. Simply become the kind of parent whose child never doubts they were loved. Then, one final sentence, written more shakily than all the others. I'm proud of you. Even on the days you weren't proud of yourself. Ian could no longer hold back the tears. He pressed the letter against his chest. For the first time since the funeral, he wasn't crying because his father was gone. He was crying because he had finally heard everything his father never found the words to say. Morning light slowly entered the room. The darkness that had hidden the letters all night began to disappear. Ian carefully placed every envelope back inside the wooden box. Not as forgotten memories, but as a conversation he would return to for the rest of his life. He picked up the photograph once more. The unfamiliar woman no longer felt like another mystery. Some stories didn't need answers. They only needed respect. He placed the picture back exactly where he had found it. Then quietly walked out of the room. The repair shop looked different. Nothing had moved. The same tools rested on the shelves. The same counter stood near the window. The same morning sunlight entered through the front glass. Yet everything felt lighter. As though the building itself had been waiting to breathe again. A soft knock came from outside. The first customer of the day. Ian wiped his eyes, unlocked the front shutter, and welcomed him inside with a smile his father would have recognized. Later that morning, his mother stepped into the shop. She immediately noticed the brown door standing open. She stopped. For several seconds, she couldn't move. Ian walked toward her. Without saying a word, he handed her the final letter. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Her hands began to tremble. She sat quietly inside the small room, reading words her husband had never spoken aloud. When she finished, she smiled through her tears. Then whispered, "He always told me the door would open when the time was right. I just didn't know the right time would be yours." Mother and son sat together in silence. Not the silence of unanswered questions. The silence of understanding. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Ian stood at the entrance of the shop. He looked toward the small brown door. For the first time in his life, it remained open. Morning light had reached a corner it had never touched before. And somehow, so had he. Some doors are never closed to hide the truth. They are closed to protect it. Until the person opening them is finally strong enough to understand what waits on the other side. Because love is not always spoken. Sometimes, it waits quietly, behind a door, until the right moment to be opened.